Hi, everyone. Just jump on. We're going to ask folks to mute themselves as they get online here. And we have started the recording. We're just going to wait one more minute for more of the attendees to jump on. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I know that lots of folks are still going to be joining as we get started, but I want to be sensitive to everyone's time. Thank you guys for joining. My name is Carol Lavoie-Schuster, and I'm the Vice President for Grants and Services here at Essex County Community Foundation. Today's session, today's Lunch and Learn, is focused on youth services. And the Lunch and Learns really emerged pre-COVID. We used to host 3 events per year where we would take a bus of fund holders or institutional funders to different communities. We'd explore topics, hear from municipal and community leaders, and enjoy lunch. And we naturally paused these during COVID. And we heard from fund holders and those in the community that there was a strong desire as the ground continued to shift beneath us to hear authentically from those that are in community, working in community, about what's really happening in an unvarnished way. Moving away from the traditional site visits and the dog and pony shows, but really imagining that we're having coffee and really hearing about, frankly, the ways that COVID has changed our work and opportunities on the horizon. So today's session is all about youth services. We'll be together for roughly an hour and 15 minutes. If the questions go long, an hour and a half. We have an amazing slate of speakers for you here today. We're going to first hear from Nellie Alba from YDO, friends up in Lawrence, then Linda Saris, the founder and executive director from LEAP in Salem, Sarah D'Alessandro, the director of programs at Root, also in Salem, and Chris Lavasco, president and CEO from the YMCA of the North Shore. Each of our presenters is going to talk a little bit about their organization, and then we've asked them to answer 3 specific questions. One is, how COVID has really changed the way they've fundamentally done their work, and what aspects of their work have shifted. And then looking forward, where are the opportunities and challenges on the horizon? And this could be an array of things that have been exacerbated during COVID, perhaps legislation, other opportunities for us as funders to take action, to take action in the community. So I'm going to turn things over to Nellie to start things off. And once we get through the slate of all of our presenters, we'll have an open Q&A period, and then we'll cap off with some highlights of things that are happening at the foundation. So Nellie, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I can just share my screen, correct? To be able to, thank you. All right. Is everyone able to see the screen? Awesome. So again, thank you everyone for being here. My name is Nellie Alba, and I'm the Director of Recruiting and Persistence at the Youth Development Organization, also known as YDO. And so what we do, we're a year-round program that offers an array of different offerings to the kids in the city, focused in the STEMs, arts, leadership, and community building, starting as early as elementary all the way to young adults. We have 3 main buckets, one being our after-school programming, which is from 3rd to 8th grade. Then we have our post-secondary pathways program, which works with our high schoolers to support them in what comes after high school. And then we have a summer program that's led by our young leaders in the city. And so those are kind of the main buckets that we kind of work under. I kind of set up a little bit of a timeline to show you how COVID has impacted us in starting from 2020 or when it hit to how it is now, because it's constantly changing. And so right when COVID first hit us in March, We had about a week left of programming, so we stopped our programming that was in person. And then we started immediately doing outreach to our families one-on-one through phone calls, just to see how everyone is doing, what's going on. We were able to secure funding to keep our staff in place, and that was our top priority in the pandemic and not knowing, what was going to happen. And from that also emerged a youth and schools working group. And that's a group that Mark Campert, our executive director, has been leading to really touch base with our youth organizations as well as the schools in the city to figure out what is the need through COVID, what do we need to do so that we're not all doing the same thing, but able to offer different offerings that are important to our kids. So if one is at that time was the food insecurity, organization was focused on that, while others needed a space to come and do work because schools went virtual. And so we were trying to talk and figure out what's the best approach during that time. For us programmatically, we in the spring decided to go virtual, as a number of other programs did as well. And we taught 16 remote classes, all from the STEM to the arts classes. We had 78 kids enrolled, which we were first surprised by the number, knowing that it was virtual, but it was the first time kids didn't know what was going on, and we were all trying to figure out what was happening. And at that time, we were also able to secure our PPP loan as well to keep us running and working as well. I also wanted to tie here, we had our piano recital. It was virtual. Kids have been working on it for some months now. So a lot of our events, you'll notice we figured out ways to incorporate them virtually so that kids are still active and connecting with one another. We also led a citywide virtual youth summit. So this was something that was able to get us information on what the high schoolers and beyonds were looking for, thinking about summertime when there was a lot of insecurity with work and school and what was going to happen. So we really wanted to get voices out there. So a lot of what you'll see during those beginning pieces was connecting with the city, figuring out what do we need to do? What do the kids want? And how can we get those voices heard? As well as collecting data for the city, 300K Youth Empowerment Fund. So we were trying to get really involved within the city. As the summer approached us, we typically will run a program that has 150 to 160 kids in person, about 50 staff members in person as well. But we obviously couldn't do that first summer. So we created 3 little buckets, one being our opportunities that we were sending off to our kids that included partner programs, online content, weekly options. We also did a mentorship program where kids met with different mentors via Zoom that still wanted to get that face-to-face time with them. And then I led a YD online training cohort with the anticipation that we were going to go still virtual come fall. And I wanted to best prepare our high schoolers to be able to teach in the virtual world. And so we did that for a set period of time while still continuing to work with the youth and schools working group and connecting within the city. In the fall time, school stayed remote. And so we were adjusting as things were happening. We started doing COVID carefulness surveys to really get to know what our families were interested in. If some families were comfortable with kids being in person, others with kids having to still be virtual. So we were trying to figure out what kind of offerings we can still do to still continue to engage our families. We had our YD online with the instructors that trained with me in the summertime. And then we launched what we called YDO to go. So if you see in the pictures here, we went directly to the students, to their homes. We went to their front lawn, we went to the courts, whatever it was that was easiest for the families, and they played games and activities. We wanted to still stay connected in the safest way possible. So we kind of adapted in that way as well. We also did what we call a tool safety and project videos. So we know that kids wanted to still do things hands-on. So we're like, how can we do this and kind of use the changes that were happening at that same time? And so as you can see here through the production, we were able to build out 6 tool safety videos and 3 project videos that our kids were able to use and still use to this point to help supplement things that they're doing in the space. And I wanted to note here as well, for Halloween, we wanted to still go out to see our kids. And so we had our vans out there. We went and visited 110 homes within the city for 2 nights and still gave some care packages. I put some pictures up here. Kids really enjoyed this. They enjoyed dressing up, seeing faces. And this was a big part of what was missing during that time, kids seeing interaction. And so that was some of those important pieces that meant a lot to us during that time as well. For our post-secondary pathways, we created care packages for the kids on campus. We did about 80 of those, and we're able to send those off to our kids off on the campus. I want to know here, we didn't do any virtual, we ended up doing virtual community events for like our Thanksgiving and our New Year's party. So just adapting things virtually, and ended up not having a gala or fundraiser that year based off everything that was going on as well. For the winter time coming to 2021, we started adapting to hybrid. So we first started doing, in-person bubbles, one day, one teacher, one group. And that happened throughout the week. So 3 classes while still doing our virtual classes, daily COVID questionnaires, and also had our second draw of the PPP loan to help us continue running and going with our kids. We started a kid-led story time series. So again, wanting to figure out ways to do things to engage our kids in the virtual world. And so you'll see the kids were taking children's book and they were reading as we had our young kids do that. We ended up doing 2 series, and we have about 3 or so kids working on it still to this point. So it's something that's really engaged and worked with the kids. And it was a nice way to adapt during that time as well. And then in the springtime, we had started having fewer virtual classes, figuring out ways to get in person because we saw that was the need and what the kids were looking for, but we wanted to do the safest way possible. We did more in person with 2 4-week sessions. Kids were limited to 1 day per week. And then we required our in-person staff to be vaccinated and encourage our student vaccination. We also hosted a COVID vaccine clinic as well for our kiddos and the families that we work with. I noted here is not necessarily COVID related, but has impacted us through this COVID time. We had our Cummings grant that helped support us, but then our building where we're located was sold. We had no landlords, and there was a lot of lease uncertainty. So you'll see how we've had to really work through what that's going to look like through this COVID time and post-COVID with the number of kids that we're tailoring to and working with as well. Our summertime, that time around, we went back in person, but we did 2 3-week sessions at 50% capacity. So 24 youth staff teaching 25 classes, 75 students per session. So the kids really enjoyed being back in person, but we still didn't want to come and gather the big group as we had done in the past. With masking as best as we can, lunch pods, and we're happy to report that we also had 0 COVID cases or spread at that time as well. The fall time, we went straight in person after school, but with limited capacity. So we only started with Monday, Tuesday classes versus every single day of the week. There was Friday outside at the parks with families this time around. So it's YDO to go style, but in larger groups. And the families really enjoyed that. And then we have a partnership at Phillips Academy, which we were able to return back in person, which had been paused since the whole pandemic had started as well. Just to know here, we still were talking with the lease, figuring out things that were going on, but there was also changes with transportation capacity and restrictions of the RMV. And so we were able to take 11 kids in our vans. We were down to 8 kids. So it also complicated, how many kids we can bring into the space and what was going on, not just now, but long-term as well. So if we're looking back at the last 6 months, we ended up negotiating at below market rate lease terms. So we signed for 10 years with a 10-year plus option, and we were able to acquire 9,000 square feet more on the 6th floor. So we're really excited about that to get more kids involved. We were able to secure a $200K earmark in the ARPA legislation, which is supporting both the transportation and the space. There's been continued flexibility in working through in-person teachings with a couple cancellations and short terms based off of, COVID spikes have happened throughout the last couple months. And then we have our post-secondary pathways that's still continuing. Renovation 6th floor is happening. So you can see on the top there, we're working with that group. YDO is returning at full capacity this summer. We did buy a bus. We're getting that in July. So that means more kids, more space, 6th floor. So what does that mean for us? And then continuing partnerships, working with our schools, expanding our post-secondary pathways to the upper school, and doing as much as possible mixed with virtual. So what we learned is that kids want to be in person. It was a lot of fatigue. It was very difficult being outside of it, but they enjoyed having the supports. There's things that we can do mixed with both. And there's a lot of that we want to continue. So we want to just get more people interested, invested in YDO success, and kind of see what happens when we get more space and how we can do things safely as we continue to figure out what's happening during this COVID time. I added a lovely picture of my son as my end here. He's our video mascot here. But we've appreciated everything. And then this is our final, our space that we're renovating right now. So windows are going up, things are happening. So this is what we're really excited to see what comes next for us as we're figuring things out. So thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Nellie. I feel so like energized remembering hearing the quick pace of all the shifts that you guys adapted to. So thank you again for all the quick navigating and pivoting in recognition of the youth that you serve. You guys are always so thoughtful about youth agency. So thank you for all that work. I have a number of questions, but we're going to jump right into Linda, moving down the county, down to Salem. And Linda, you are on mute.
I'm sitting here mumbling to myself that I know how to do this and I can do this. So I'm going to switch to this. And okay. Screen. Okay. Slide. Sorry. View slideshow. Okay. Okay, so it might help if I start with the first slide, which was always helpful. Okay, everybody can see this? We're good? And I am going to start my timer to make sure I don't go over my 10 minutes. Very disciplined. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming today. And thank you, Carol and Megan, for inviting us. I do want to introduce John Dudley, who's on the call, who's our Director of Development. So I do want to just go through some fundamentals around what LEAP's all about. So most people don't know it is an acronym. It stands for Learn, Explore, Aspire, and Pursue. So the learn piece of it is we do a lot of project-based learning and academic support. Social emotional is a big part of our programming. So we do a lot of mentoring and life skills development. A lot of you know us as, college success, but we do a lot of post-secondary advising and as well as career services, helping people to create our students to create a pathway into a career that matches their strengths and interests. And then finally, we embed social capital into everything we do, the importance of helping our students make those important social connections that they'll need along their pathway. We started a Career Connections initiative back in 2018. We moved our emphasis from being solely on getting kids into college. We moved it to more post-secondary, recognizing that students are going to track into trades as well and other career paths that don't require college. So we do a lot of work around awareness, exploration, so students can learn about the different pathways. And then finally, we have opportunities for kids to immerse themselves either through jobs, internships, job shadowing, or volunteer opportunities to learn more about their careers. Just a little bit of numbers. The first year of the pandemic, we did about 400 students. This past year, we're over 600 now. This gives you some of our demographics. As you can see, it's mostly economically disadvantaged students, large majority students of color. First gen, and about a third of our students are don't have English as their first language. They're either still English language learners or former English language learners. We leverage volunteers, are very important to our organization. So we last year had 133 volunteers. We created a business partner network made up of some of these organizational logos that we have down here. This means that these partners have committed employee participation as volunteers. And so we really are dependent at this point on our volunteers pretty much throughout our programs, but particularly in our career programs. Just a little bit about impact. LEAP, our post-secondary enrollment and persistence rate, which are students who complete their second year of post-secondary, either with an associate's degree or second year in a four-year college. As you can see, our numbers are about double that for the state. And our post-secondary graduation rates 3 times that of what the average is for the state. So now into the COVID, I'm going to focus a little bit more on post-COVID. Nellie did an amazing job covering her journey. And I found, as I've talked to a lot of nonprofits, we all kind of went through that same stage of, you know, the one-on-ones, and then all hybrid, and then a mix of hybrid and in person, and then finally into in person. And, you know, we tracked pretty similarly to Nellie's timeline. What I started to think about is like what we all said, you know, post-COVID brought a certain amount of silver lining as well. Hard to believe, but there were opportunities that we're trying to take advantage of. You know, a lot of our students like the flexibility of being virtual or in person. So we bought some technology that's in the classroom now, so that all of our classrooms have the ability for kids to come into the classroom remotely. We have the ability to record, so that students who miss one of their programs can go in and listen to it into it later. So we've kind of embraced the technology. We got some technology grants to do that. We have 2 classrooms now with a technology called Swivel, SWIVL. It also allowed us to experiment with this hybrid summer work experience. So students do their work with their career mentors virtually, but they're in person with their LEAP staff, where they do their career workshops and work on their summer work, their summer projects. On the staff side, our staff clearly has made it known that they like this flexible scheduling. They like the ability to be sometimes at home. Obviously, our staff that works with students have to be in person, but they have the flexibility to do part of their workday at home if that's works best for them. So we've maintained that. And that's actually saved us from having to get more space, because we were kind of bursting at the seams pre-COVID. And I procrastinated, thank God, for once it was actually in my benefit that I didn't add more space before COVID. The challenges have been a lot. We've had a myriad of mental health and behavioral issues. Our students are really trying to adjust back to a structured educational environment socially, particularly for our kids in transition between middle and high school and elementary to middle to high school, and high school to college. You know, having had to do a lot of that last year and a half work virtually, and now they're finding themselves in a brand new school with no connections or relationships with teachers, or in some instances other students. So that's been really difficult for us. We've had to invest more money in bringing in behavioral specialists to work with the students. Rebooting programs with our teenagers has been a bear. Our programs came back with waiting lists at our middle school level, but getting the teens to re-engage, they kind of, you know, they think with their feet. I mean, they make their own decisions more. And they're a very, I don't know, we're trying to get our arms around it. We're hearing the same thing in other programs and the schools, and we're trying different strategies to get them back engaged. Learning loss is big. So, you know, helping students catch up in their work is really important. And then staff hiring has just been very, very difficult. You know, hiring people, we've had to make salary adjustments across the board, not only to address inflation, but market rate adjustments. And our staff's dealing with a myriad of COVID-related absences. Every day, 1 or 2 staff people call out because they've either been exposed or are sick themselves. So these have all been challenges. I do want to thank ECCF, because they did give us a very large grant, so we were able to shift our model during COVID from after school to in school, where we actually took over some learning pods at Salem Middle School. So we actually took over a couple of classrooms, and also were able to do more in Lynn as well. On the horizon is we moved into Lynn right at the start of the pandemic, and had to do our first year virtually, which was difficult to be in a new city and never having met in person any of our students or parents. But this year has been awesome. We had a huge waiting list. We got some money from Lynn to open up more slots for the students off the waiting list. And now our students are graduating middle school, and they want to know what we got for them for high school programming. So we will be opening up a Lynn high school program in January of 2023. We're expanding our career services. We've doubled the size of our career program this summer, and we're hoping to expand that into a pilot school year program in 2023. We're building up our infrastructure to support this growth. As we move into Lynn, we're suddenly realizing we need some more middle manager positions, which we've never had before. So our staff is pretty stretched. We need new policies, invest in new technology and so forth. And we're doing a lot of really hard work in the whole diversity, equity, inclusion. And we've added A for advocacy because we think it's important that our students learn to advocate for themselves and advocate for causes that they care about. So we're doing more work in that space. Just sort of, we started to think about like what makes us, you know, what's the secret sauce? Is there a secret sauce? I mean, we now look at career as the end goal, not college. It's social connections, closing that opportunity gap, giving kids access to not only social networks, but different opportunities and resources is really important to us. We're really focused on that opportunity gap issue. Providing a middle pipeline of programs from middle school right through post-secondary graduation enables us to establish long-term trusted relationships with students over a very long period of time, and as a result, their families. We partner very closely with the schools. We have contracts with the Lynn and the Salem Public Schools. We're able to maintain very low student-teacher ratios. All of our lessons are structured. We have curriculum, lesson plans, benchmarks, everything from our middle school programs all the way through our college programs. We've also invested heavily in programs for our English language learners. Hey, that's my call to shut up. And then finally, everything at LEAP is free. So to end my talk here, we have 100 kids coming in a month for our summer work program. So we're looking for volunteer career mentors. So if there's anyone on this call interested in doing that, you just send an email to me. And thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Linda. Again, you're keeping up with like the high energy pace of, you know, jumping off after Nellie. It's hard to fit in all the changes that have happened, right? It's really remarkable how all of these organizations have pivoted so significantly, rapidly during the last.
I just have to ask one question, Linda. You said everything at LEAP is free. Does that mean you don't need any more money?
Yeah, actually, John, who's our director of development, has cautioned me about phrasing it that way. Free to the students, not free to LEAP.
Awesome. Thank you, Linda. We're going to move right into Sarah at Root, another great Salem nonprofit. And then right after Sarah, we'll move into Chris, and then we'll be able to have some Q&A.
Thank you. And thank you, Megan, in advance for driving my slides. I have definitely found in the last couple of years of Zoom communication that I cannot walk and chew gum at the same time. So I appreciate the assistance. My name is Sarah D'Alessandro. I'm the director of programs at Root, which is actually in the same building, not just the same city, but the same building as LEAP, Shetland Park in Salem. Just a little background about what Root is for those of you who don't know. So we launched operationally in 2017, and at our root, or at our core, no pun intended, we are a culinary job training program. So we provide a 14-week program through which we seek to help young people find a pathway to independence through food service training, financial independence, financial literacy courses, and then also transitional employment opportunities that we offer. So in addition to being a training program, we also run social enterprises. We have a cafe, we have a full catering production kitchen and facility. We offer on-site events, which LEAP had an event last night in our space, which was beautiful. And then I will talk a lot more about this in the next 9 minutes or so, but we also have a new growing, burgeoning community catering initiative specifically developed to address food insecurity in Essex County. You can go to the next slide. So just a little visual representation of who we are, where we are, and who we serve. So I like to say that we're kind of a small little boat in a big sea. We're seeking to serve all of Essex County in our programs. So we're located in Salem, but we recruit students from schools, nonprofit agencies, state agencies, et cetera, throughout Essex County, and also cities north of Boston, such as Chelsea and Revere. The students that we aim to serve, it's kind of a big tent. 16 to 26 is our applicant pool, and they are coming from diverse lived experiences facing different barriers to employment. So I always like to talk about exactly what's happening right now. So in our current cohort, we have a 16-year-old and a 26-year-old. We have a single mom. We have a young woman who's dropped out of high school. We have 3 students who are in danger of dropping out of high school. We have somebody who's been court involved. We have somebody who struggled with the traditional education model in the K-12 system, has a learning disability. And we have somebody who's overcoming some mental health challenges, which is obviously becoming more of a persistent and concerning trend. So what I like about the Root program is that even though it's a big tent, we're serving students who have diverse lived experiences, the ages, it's quite a big age range. I think in my experience from my observations, midway through that program, those disappearances, at least when it comes to what they're doing every single day in the kitchen, they kind of disappear. Everybody's making the same recipe. Everybody's struggling with the same frustrations of what yeast does to dough or does not do to dough. Everybody's having the same sort of experience going through the job search process and learning a little bit more about how to pitch themselves to an employer. So it's great to see that, it takes some weeks, but halfway through, the 17-year-old and the 25-year-old, so to speak, have become good friends. You can go ahead to the next slide. So why food service? So I want to admit these numbers are old. These numbers are from 2021, but I think it's important to note that the trend here was relevant in 2017 when we launched. And it also continues to be relevant today, of course, in 2022, that this is an industry that needs workers. It's a growing industry in the North Shore, the restaurant and food service industry. And it's also an industry where there's opportunities for entry into it at a very basic level, such as a dishwasher or a food runner, or seasonal opportunities for some of our students and our trainees who are still in the pool. And then there's also, of course, the opportunities for slightly more higher skilled positions such as line cook or prep cook, which is where we're aiming to put Root graduates. And then, of course, there's tremendous growth in this industry as well into management roles. So this is why, this is just a snapshot representing why food service is our focus. You can go ahead and switch. So there we were humming along. 2020 hit. We had a growing training program. We had growing social enterprises. We had a beautiful event space overlooking Salem Harbor. And usually when I talk with partners and friends, I'm at our event space so I can point behind me to the harbor. Unfortunately, today you get my living room. But all of this was coming along beautifully. And then March 2020 hit, and we had to shut down our training program for a few weeks, finish up a cohort remotely. Social enterprises dried up. The Root Cafe, which is on site, was frequented by other tenants in Shetland Park. So we lost a significant customer base. Catering by Root dried up. Harbor Point events dried up. No one was using the event space. No one was holding their own events or ordering catering from us. And so we had to pivot quite dramatically. And we pivoted our kitchen, our production capacity, to focus on preparing community meals for those facing food insecurity in Essex County. So not only did we have this walk-in full of food, and a lot of organizations that do similar work to us across the country came to the same realization: when you have a walk-in full of food, expiration dates, food insecurity in the area. But closer to home, there was also a dramatic increase in food insecurity in Essex County, a 47% increase from 2019 to 2020. Of those experiencing food insecurity. So that was the significant pivot that we made, and a few stats about what we've achieved since then. So more than 55,000 plus meals have been prepared in our kitchen by alumni of our program to address food insecurity in Essex County. We've developed partnerships to feed senior citizens, to feed children and youth. We are delivering to agencies who work specifically with those experiencing housing or food insecurity. And so those partnerships actually continue to develop, as well as our partnerships with local farms to actually source our food as locally or as regionally as possible. So this in and of itself presented us, Linda mentioned silver linings with a little bit of an interesting opportunity. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So as a little bit of background, in the beginning, when Root started, training and production were one and the same. So our trainees were our workforce, essentially. We had trainees producing some of the meals for events. We had them producing some of the meals for catering orders, the cafe, et cetera. But this growing community catering initiative, as well as, what had been before the pandemic and what is now a growing social enterprise arm, led us to needing a slightly more skilled workforce with a little bit more flexibility and also a little bit more accountability in the kitchen. And this is also something I think that, is not unique to Root. A lot of teaching kitchens across the country have realized this, that to do training and production at the same exact time presents a significant challenge. And what we had here was also this new opportunity to address food insecurity in Essex County. So our community meals initiative is growing. Social enterprises are opening back up. That allows us to provide food to those who need it in our community. And it also allows us to provide employment opportunities to alums of our program. So now we have these two, both essentially critical, whole, important programs that we're offering. And we have to balance those. So we have a full production kitchen in the morning that's producing all of that food for social enterprise, food for those experiencing food insecurity. And then we have our training program, which used to exist in the morning and afternoon. We have pivoted to making that an afternoon only class. So we definitely experienced some challenges, which I'll talk about a little bit more, to recruitment and enrollment, and those are ongoing in our training program. But we never actually went remote. So we closed down in March 2020. We finished up a class, but then we started the class up again in person in July 2020. So we've always been working with young people in our kitchen through 2020, through 2021, smaller classes, of course, in those years, but now we're getting bigger again, and we're starting to see an increase in our applications. So we have this opportunity to provide a much more robust culinary training program in the morning, which actually works through a foundational culinary arts training, from basic skills, techniques, to more sophisticated cuisines, ingredients, recipes, et cetera. And those trainees can still help with production that's happening in our production kitchen throughout the course of their 14 weeks with us. And so not only are we still able to serve those who might be experiencing some barriers to employment, but we're also a free culinary training program in an area where a lot of culinary programs, post-secondary culinary programs, are actually shutting down. So interesting opportunity to continue serving there. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I love this picture so much. So this is our 15th cohort, which started with us in January and finished up in early May. And I like to call out this cohort in particular because we had 12 students who started with us in January, and we had 12 students who graduated in May. So that was the first time that we had seen 100% retention in our training program since we had started. And I think there's a couple things that go into that. So obviously, we saw a decline in applications throughout 2020, 2021, decline in enrollment. But what we have now, by offering smaller classes in the afternoon right now, is we have an opportunity to form really significant partnerships and relationships with our students.
I can't believe it. I literally, as I said in my
I also can't believe it. And we also have the opportunity, because we have these relationships with trainees, and because we have this burgeoning transitional employment opportunity that we're offering in the morning, we have the opportunity to talk with our trainees throughout the entire time that they're with us about these employment opportunities that we can offer to them right at Root. So don't want to deny that there's been challenges, of course, to the training program, recruitment and enrollment, as I mentioned, significant challenges related to public transportation in Essex County. Obviously, as other people have mentioned, the changing COVID protocols. If a student is sick, we can't have them come in. We have to figure out a creative way to have them catch up on a culinary kitchen technique remotely. And then there's also a changing restaurant industry, which I think is a really important point to consider as we move forward. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So Root is really built on partnerships. Here's a few images of our our most recent graduating class at their internship sites. Every student that comes through our program does a 2-week internship at the end of the program in month 3. This is Thomas at Deli House and Lex at Bambolina and Rudy at Cafe Avellino in Swampscott. And so we are reliant on these partners in the industry who are willing to train our trainees. We can't really do this work without them. We also can't do the work, obviously, without social service agencies, nonprofits, schools, et cetera, that are interested in connecting their students and clients to us. And we also can't produce healthy food, nourishing food without local farms. and local farms and sources to give us the ingredients to produce those meals. But the one thing that I do want to mention in particular about the restaurant industry, and you can go ahead and go to the next slide, is that this is a real changing industry right now. So there's a series of quotes here, which I won't read because I think they speak really well for themselves. But this comes from a series that the Boston Globe did about a year ago, June 2021, just talking about how the restaurant industry has sort of been confronted with the reality of a somewhat broken system, underpaid workers, not enough, margin of profit for them to invest in their workforce, a minimum wage that wasn't necessarily keeping up with the cost of living. And so what I think is an interesting part, in addition to obviously continuing to develop our partnerships to get students in our doors so we can train them, there's also a responsibility that we now have to be better partners to our restaurant partners in the industry who are experiencing significant challenges still in hiring, even as we, quote unquote, knock on wood, come out of the pandemic. So what's ahead for Root? Go ahead and go to the next slide. So since 2017, we've built a culinary job training program. We've built award-winning catering enterprises, and we have this new burgeoning initiative to address food insecurity through our community catering, which is entirely driven by the alumni of our program who are working in our production kitchen. Obviously, what the last couple of years has revealed for us is that food insecurity is a deep and persistent problem in Essex County and everywhere. And youth disengagement from workforce and school is a growing concern and trend. And the cost of labor and the cost of food and the cost of living for the laborer, these are always going to continue to be opposing forces. So our role, as I see it right now, is to continue to expand these vocational and training opportunities and these transitional employment opportunities that we have for our young people. Also to support our partner industry, our restaurant partners, and play a larger facilitation role also in a growing regional food system, continuing to source locally, be that middle point that produces that food, and then distributing it out through channels that already exist. Go ahead and go to the last slide. I'm just going to leave this here. So this is a code you can scan if you want to sign up for our newsletter, in which you will get any and all of the above: delicious pictures of food, notifications about volunteer opportunities we have at Root, news about our cohort and our recent graduates, and invitations to events that we're having in our space. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I love the Root story in terms of how those interconnections with the community were already baked into your work, and how that gave you the ability to really pivot so quickly overnight when you had those freezers or fridges full of food. You quickly shifted them. So again, another demonstration. I think that, if we looked 10 years ago, orgs were still super siloed, or even 5 years ago. So thank you for that. Let's turn things over to Chris, and then we'll open things up for questions.
Thank you so much, Carol. I just really want to recognize Linda and Nellie and Sarah. I know we're here to tell our stories, but they're inspiring even to each other, I think. So I really appreciate being a part of this group and alongside my peers here. So I'm looking at the crowd and I see past directors, I see board members, I see trustees, donors, members of the Y. So trying to explain the Y, all that it's endured and where we're headed based on COVID, 10 minutes. Seems fairly simplistic. It's going to be a little bit tricky and bumpy because it is a large scale organization. But as I listen to these stories, I'm inspired and reminded that we are the collective of all of the individual programs. So I'm going to start big and I'm going to kind of scale it down to really a key area that our Y is focused on. So I'm going to share my screen now. The Y really starts with our mission. And I think through COVID, every organization had to lean into their mission and had to say, is our mission relevant? Does it speak to the new needs? And what I can tell you is when you look at our mission that says we welcome all, we educate and nurture children, we strengthen community, and we promote healthy living in spirit, mind, and body, we found out that our mission endured. I know I, as the leader, I leaned into this mission during COVID like I've never done. We had to educate and nurture children in new ways. We pioneered the remote learning and the emergency childcare. We had to. We were the ones left in that area when emergency childcare was needed, when emergency personnel, medical, all the way to grocery store owners, our staff, our childcare staff said, we have to do this. This is what we do. And if you remember, it's hard to go back 2 years. We didn't know a lot about that virus at that time, but I was and always will be so impressed with our team who said, this is what we do. And so it was a scary time, but educating and nurturing children all the way through to what ECCF focused on in the digital divide, we saw it. Once we could go back to school, the schools weren't open, but the remote learning was. And there were so many families that didn't have access to the networks, the computers, the Wi-Fi. We helped bring those systems through places like ECCF and many other donors. But really what we were asked to do is, it didn't matter if you had the technology, there was no one to watch their children. And so all of our centers became remote centers. We became, in that strengthening of community, what the community needed. When our buildings were shut, some became shelters, some became training centers, some became food distribution centers. We really strengthened communities in ways we never thought. When we promoted healthy living, we didn't think we were going to be large-scale vaccination centers or testing centers, but we became that as we were needed. The whole relevance of our mission changed, but it also remained the same. And we prioritized those that are most vulnerable. When we had to shut down, we still had over 570 residents that call the YMCA home through affordable housing, and they needed our support. We still had emergency childcare centers opened in all of our places. We still needed to keep looking at the children who are in our care on contracts and vouchers, which I'll talk about a little later. They needed connectivity. They needed support for those families. The senior members that we had, the people who were in our Cornerstone program for cancer survivors, we had to prioritize the most vulnerable of communities. We had to do it while we kept advancing our projects because the community needed us to be there for them when we emerged. So we had to keep building our Cape Ann YMCA. We had to keep building our Cabot Housing Affordable Project. We had to keep moving the needle forward on projects like the Senior Housing Project in Gloucester. It was important for us to be our mission, and we had to double down on welcoming everyone. This was a really interesting time for us. We always wondered, and I think it's an age-old question people said is, if the Y couldn't offer all of the facilities we had, would people still be members? When we had to shut down, we were really proud. 77% of our members for the time we were shut down said, continue my membership dues. You're doing great work. That meant something to us. And what we realized was the Y was a place where everyone with diverse backgrounds, diverse lifestyles, diverse thoughts, they found common ground and a sense of belonging. And when the Ys shut down, tens of thousands of people lost those connections. And they ended up in areas of small bubbles, only with people who thought like them, that were mostly like them, that had the same backgrounds. And when we reopened, it was an incredible stretch to try to bring people back into dialogue and discussion, because we emerged from a world where the only way many people felt they could be right was to prove other people wrong. And that was a difficult thing when you started bringing hundreds and thousands of people back together, when you had situations where some people loved their children so much that masks were essential, and other people loved their children so much and masks were horrible. And we had to find the common ground to say, but you all love your children. Let's get together. Let's talk it through. And that was day to day, hour by hour. So I'm going to start big, like I said, and go down small, but our mission drove us during this time. Prior to the pandemic, we had just reached a milestone. We had reached 1/3 of all the communities we serve, 25 communities. There's about 300,000 people. We were engaged with over 100,000 of them as members, program participants, donors, staff, volunteers. It's like a small city. It's a lot of people. And to immediately know that you lost connectivity with half of them. And what's really interesting is most of that happened after we reopened. People had begun, there was still great concern about transition. There still is. Even now, we're back to about 80% of our connectivity, and we're proud of that. But people found some new paths, which is great if it's healthy. But we also have people still afraid to come together. And worse probably than any, through our surveying, we have people that gave up. They really just gave up on a lot of their health. They just have not reemerged. And so we've got a lot of work to do to regain connectivity as this why. Really kind of looking at it through children though, the better story is most of what we lost, that 20% is adults, and we're working on that. The children came back. We are right now in any given week, we have between 4,000 and 6,000 kids involved in our Ys. And again, that's in 25 communities. And you've got to remember each one of those, you could take apart to 12 to 20 kids in small groups. And so we do have a lot of staff involved. We watched it drop all the way down to just emergency childcare and had to watch it rebuild. It was reassuring to us. It said people do value what this Y offers, because when we could reopen, they came right back. But they came back a little different with a lot more need. Our financial aid in 2019, we provided about $2.4 million. In 2020, that jumped to 3.5, and it's projected at 4.2. These are big numbers. I put them in the middle of the presentation to just let that resonate for a minute. We know it because we surveyed it, and the new norm for us is through remote learning, through emergency childcare, through shelter work, through food provision, through affordable housing care. We emerged out of this pandemic known as a social service industry now among people who didn't know us. And they came back to us and said, we want more, but we can't afford it. And so we have maintained our promise to not turn anyone away due to inability to pay at a very, very higher price. That being said, a lot of it's in childcare. 2,500 of those 4,000 to 6,000 kids are with us in licensed childcare. This is the part where I start to narrow it down, folks. So we've got 10 partnerships with cities and towns. We run 9 early education centers. We have 33 school-based centers. So I want you to remember and picture one site in one community, let's say Beverly, at one school could be 93 kids that have group support, that have an educational-based program that has all of the needs of any small nonprofit, sometimes that serves 100 to 200 kids. We just do it 35 times a day in different areas. Before the pandemic, about 1 out of 4 of our kids were on a state support, a contract or a voucher. I'm going to stop for a second and say contract voucher. We say those phrases a lot. In the why we remember, and I know it is in my childcare peers, voucher means this family is at best living paycheck to paycheck. In worst, they are far below the poverty level. And if you're on a contract, you have been recognized by the state as abused or neglected. In RY, we have 700 of those contracts. And so those 1 out of 4 were very important. The 2 out of 4, they paid for it with their funds because they believed in our mission and our program. And 1 out of 4 wanted to, but couldn't afford it. And we provided the scholarships to ensure it. Today, it's a third, a third, and a third. That means 200 to 300 more kids are in our program at need, and need has grown. What's really pushing us right now is we are challenged like we've never been. It's a supply and demand issue. The demand for childcare is off the charts, and for camp, even more. We are, for the first time in my 28-year history with RY, we are limiting enrollment. We have not been able to fill all of the spots that people want because we don't have the staff. And we are unwilling to oversubscribe a childcare program or camp program unless we have staff that are committed. So for the first time, that is our greatest need. Our employees are in demand and they have new responsibilities. It was already hard to be a preschool teacher. Now you're a preschool teacher, you're a health consultant, you're a mental health specialist, you're a family consultant, and it's getting really difficult to keep people in that service industry. We have increased our compensation for that level of staff by 20% over the last probably year and a half. Linda spoke to the demand. Our environments, the families want more connectivity. They want more involvement. That's forcing more software systems, communication systems. During COVID, we had some backed up deferred maintenance. We're investing almost $2 million into our sites right now. And we're doing that thanks to the support for the relief funds that did come. But the biggest issue we're facing right now, and was mentioned a couple of places, the mental health of the kids today are in a different area we can't describe. We knew social media, we knew the media in general was a problem prior to the pandemic. Today, we're in an information revolution. They're inundated. These poor kids, they're seeing things that we've never seen. They believe the world is on fire. They're seeing war. They're seeing global pandemic. They're seeing climate issue. They're seeing racial issues. They're seeing everything firsthand through social media, and they're in trouble. And so mental health is a big focus, and we think the wise position for it. This is our vision. We are trying to imagine the why slightly different, where it's recognized in the future for mental health support the same way we're looked at as physical fitness and recreation. We have to get to a place where every one of our school-based programs has a team of mental health specialists. We started pre-pandemic with 5 people who were behavior specialists. We've now gone to 21 that are inclusion specialists, case managers, LSWs, MSWs, and we need 65, and they're in demand. There's no funding for it, and the state doesn't require it. But right now, those kids who are in need, they're holding our teachers hostage. The teachers want to work with 15, 16 kids, but the other 2 are preventing the type of environment we need. We've got to get those 2 or 3 support. Can't just kick them out. We've got to bring some integrated therapies into our Ys. There are some amazing things for kids who are struggling with anxiety, with anger issues, with autism, with depression. We've got music therapists, art therapists, dance therapists, boxing therapists. We've got to get them all into our Y where we can normalize therapy. We can destigmatize it, because when it's at the Y, it's normal. We've got to change our philosophy from walking by and being excited about a spinning class with 15 people in it. I want to walk by and see a coping class for individuals who are dealing with the loss of a spouse, or a child who has a sibling with disabilities. And why doesn't that be included with your membership? If aqua aerobics is, I don't need insurance, we can build it in. We got to start with our employees. I've got 1,400 people. The caregivers need care. And we have a philosophy that says, if we can do it with others, we don't want to do it alone. So we are looking for every partner we can in this, and ECCF has been an amazing support for it. Ultimately, right now, our Y is strong, but we are being asked to do more than we've ever done to support our mission and to support the community. We're being asked to do it at a time where we are challenged operationally, but we've got some strong relief funds, and we're going to use them to rebuild and reposition. And I do want to give one quick shout out to a woman who helped all of us and didn't even recognize it. The passing of Betsy Mary. If people don't know, Betsy introduced us to a young politician when Seth Moulton started. And in the middle of our pandemic, Seth was reached out to because Betsy allowed us to know him. Seth didn't know that the PPP program from the SBA didn't include nonprofits. We were able to get Seth and one other Republican to push on that. And without Seth, we all wouldn't have been eligible for PPP funding. That's the entire country. And that happened out of our little place right here on the North Shore. So thank you to my peers and to everyone. That's my story.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you for lifting up the behavioral health challenges. And thank you to the Y for the many, many ways that you guys have stepped up and pivoted in so many significant ways. Thank you for that. I'd love to open things up for questions. I know I have a whole host of questions, but likewise, I'm certain that the room here. So we'll just have folks raise a hand and I can call on you. If you're uncomfortable, you can certainly put it in the chat box. Megan and I will monitor those. Okay. John Payson.
Thank you. I learned something. I thought I knew a lot about all these organizations, but I learned something about each of them, even once I'm on a board of. So thank you all for that. One of the interesting, there are a bunch of questions I could ask, but one of the ones is about volunteers. Linda, you had cited 133 volunteers. I know at Root we've been looking at how to mobilize volunteers for things like food deliveries, et cetera. And Chris, you put out a call for them, and I know YDO as well. So my question is, are you seeing, given the incremental demand that the nonprofit sector and each of the four of you are being, the things you're being asked to do, where do you find the volunteers and who's honchoing them?
So I can start. So we really started to ramp up the volunteer thing after Trump became president. There were so many baby boomers my age who were retiring that were horrified at the attack on the immigrant population, as well as other things, that reached out to us and said, how can we help? So that sort of started. So we were getting people calling us. We made sure that we have like a variety of volunteer opportunities because we know that some people are busier than others. So some engage in perhaps doing, agree to do like a mock interview night or a speaker series or something. And then we have a smaller pool of that 130 volunteers, maybe somewhere in the 20 to 30 range of people who are committed to come like every week to do something. But the most of them, and then there's a whole group that just volunteer during the summer as career mentors. But the reason we created the Business Partner Network is it really, as it started to grow, it did start to become an issue. We have 100 kids, we're matching up one-on-one with a career mentor this summer. So finding 100 people willing to volunteer their time this summer to do that was a horrifying thought. So we started to develop this Business Partner Network, and all these companies are starting to work on DEI initiatives. And so part of their DEI initiatives, that they say, this gives us an opportunity to deploy our employees, not only to start to feed a potential employee pipeline into our companies, but for us to do and help these students, provide them, start to close that opportunity gap. So we have an MOU, a very soft, it's not a legal contract, that says that they will promote when we have speaker events or mentoring opportunities, they promote it within their organization. We've got certain, I'd call them evangelists within organizations that make sure the word gets out. And so that sort of helped us create. So now we have this fairly large volunteer pool. We've probably got a database of over a couple hundred volunteers now that we can reach out to. So that's sort of, I'll let the other folks talk, but that's sort of how we built it up.
So I'll jump in on a retro review of it. We were almost going in an opposite direction. Because of the scale we're at, sometimes bringing volunteers and peering them with people who are paid, there's a lot of issues with that. So we have to be really conscious of what we're using volunteerism for. Our goal has been to re-engage the community through volunteerism as a program, but the program really is not, it's not obvious. We're getting really back into parent advisory councils, from everything for youth sports to preschool programs to after-school programs. And we're doing it for two reasons. Like we said, it's a little disguised. It's not to drive the program, but it's to connect community again. And if we can get 150 volunteers in parent advisory groups, you have to create the diverse demographics that you need to have the representation. But what you're actually doing is you're building one of the strongest community development programs. And so we're trying to do that, which it's interesting because it can slow down the progress of the rebuild because things become a little democratic, but you have to balance that. And it really, our boards, they have been amazing, but it has definitively been harder to build boards during this time. You've lost the personal connectivity for a couple of years, and we're not seeing, we've never seen something where every single individual was affected. So it wasn't a Y problem or elite problem or a North Shore problem. Most people had their own individual issues, and it took a good year for them to settle down their own issues. And now they're starting to rebuild into the community.
And if I could jump in here after you, Chris. For us at YDO, volunteers come in like in two main buckets for us, and one being our youth in the city, are who primarily teach in the after school settings. We have high school and college students, and so we work through volunteering and or stipend paid for our kids. There's a mix of those two. But during the pandemic, we saw the need of kids needing to support and wanting to get paid, and so it was a little bit more difficult. We were trying to figure out how can we raise funds to help support, even if we're able to provide some stipends for our young ones that are volunteering in the after school setting. And so it remained a mix, but there was a couple more, the need was for kids to be back working and or supporting the families. And so we saw a bit of those. We have a lot of more families that are coming in looking to see how can they volunteer. And for us, it was a little bit more difficult because of the numbers, how many people we're having in the space, how many activities were happening, virtually compared to in person. But we're seeing that need now as we're approaching the summertime. And that's something that we're looking to figure out, how can we incorporate, parents that want to get involved for the same reason you mentioned, Chris, in terms of community building and working with our families so that they can feel engaged and connected with what it is that we're doing within our organization and with their kids and their families. And so now we're looking, during field trips and things like parents can kind of work and do things outdoors with us and support us, even in our Pathways program. And so we're trying to think more about how we incorporate and work with our parents that want to volunteer, and then also best support, that volunteer group we're working with before with our students, but that the need is right now helping support their families financially, and I need some type of payment for that too. So it's a mix, a little bit difficult.
John, I realized I didn't answer the second part of your question in terms of how you manage it all, because as we started to get this pool of volunteers, so we did create a position. So we have a person who's in charge of our career services, and as part of her responsibility, she's supposed to be managing the business partner network as well. But as that's beginning to learn, we're working on our budget for next year. We're going to split that role into two. So we're going to have one group concentrating on building career services curriculum for the kids, and then another person who's just going to be focusing externally on our corporate partnerships and our volunteers. So.
Thank you. Sarah, did you want to answer the volunteer question?
I'll actually just say that, so John is right, of course, that we've had volunteer opportunities for food delivery through some recent generous federal dollars distributed through ECCF, though we have been able to hire a delivery driver, which has been honestly game-changing for Root, literally game-changing. Somebody who can be on hand in the kitchen, a production force, and then also delivering meals. And we've always had, I think it was Linda who had mentioned the social capitals. We've always had volunteers come in to serve as resume reviewers or mock interviewers for our young people. And our goal there is not so much to get a perfect resume or to execute a perfect mock interview, but to establish some connections with other people in the community. So that's always an area where we're looking for more volunteer help. And then additionally, an area that I'm focusing on, to pick up on my ideas about, creating stronger and more durable relationships with this changing industry, is I'm also looking for ways to further develop the volunteer opportunities we have for our restaurant partners. So essentially, every time a restaurant partner offers a training opportunity for our trainees, that's actually a volunteer opportunity. We don't compensate the restaurants in any way. We get takeout from them religiously, but that is a volunteer opportunity essentially. And I'd like to develop, deeper connections, whether it's through guest chef appearances where they can see some of our students actually in action, or just even guest speaker appearances, or growing our field trip program a little bit more, and perhaps also developing a specific chef advisory council that would actually, be composed of volunteers from professionals who have been in or are currently in the food service space or restaurant industry, whether it's working in a hospital or nursing home or working in a traditional restaurant. But just developing a group of thought partners that can help us direct, like I was saying, this training program that needs to continue to grow and refine itself to meet the needs of this industry. So yeah, lots of different volunteer opportunities at Root.
That's great. Thank you.
Hi there. Diane Brand here. Excuse me. I have a question to the conversation that Chris had about what the Y is doing to support mental health. I'm involved with Plummer as a respite foster parent, and I know that there is one of my respite children has been on a wait list for almost 1.5 years for a trauma therapist. And I can tell you, as she becomes a teenager, it's only going to get harder, and her challenges will only get greater. And I was just wondering, are there any studies out there? Because I know it's a nationwide problem too, but it seems like people should be looking at what exactly is the shortage and how can we fill this gap? How can we develop careers? How can we pay the workers better so that they can enter the field? It's truly devastating.
I would be happy to jump in on that for just a moment, not try to get on a soapbox, but we've been spending a lot of time on this. There's a multitude of areas that have to be addressed here. One of the things we are trying to do, and we're partnering with schools who are seeing the same thing, we've entered a world where there's a range of issues, starting with situational behavioral issues that have been augmented, all the way through to clinically needed mental health intervention. And we've got a burnt out amount of teachers and after school staff and daycare providers who, if they have a few resources, they are getting very quick to send those off instead of being trained to mitigate those the way they had in the past, and maybe with a little bit more support. And many of those kids who are being introduced to the mental health issues through social media and such are, I hate to say it this way, there are many taking up spots in clinical settings or in therapeutic settings that may have been able to been handled more in the field with more training and investment to free up some of those spots that are critically needed. And we know that they're more critically needed in those with less resources. But also we're seeing the biggest strap is the middle class, upper, lower, and middle. Those that are very, that have a lot of financial need have some navigation systems. Those with a lot of resources find it, but those in the middle are really struggling. And so I do think it's a bit of trying prevention. So one of the things our Y is also going to start doing, and I'd like any help anyone has, we've got to start hiring 14 and 15-year-olds again. We've got to start giving some of these kids a sense of control. And many of us stopped doing that because of liability. We've got to create it as a program and remember that when I say we have children in our program, some of them we're paying. They're 16 years old and they're working for us, but they're still children. Sorry, I told you it was a soapbox there.
Hey, somebody who had her first paying job at about 10 years old, picking leaves off of a blueberry conveyor belt, yeah, and I love
That is
working.
the biggest area I think we have to address this, because kids that don't feel in control. I know I didn't have a lot of money growing up. I didn't have control until I had a job.
On the issue of mental health, and I so applaud what Chris is doing over at the Y.
Trying to.
We're struggling. We're not as big as the Y, not even close. So, it's like, what is our core competency? We see this need for mental health, but we're not mental health providers. And I don't know, do we have the financial capacity to build a whole mental health practice? At this point, what we're saying is, we want to partner with mental health. We did some work with narrative therapy. Dr. Gaddis recently passed away, which was very, very sad. He was very helpful in training our staff in narrative therapy. We've worked with Children Friends, well, let's not call that anymore, JRI, I guess it is. And now that I know Chris is in the game, I maybe reach out to him. So that's, and we have brought behavioral specialists on staff who are school personnel who are just looking for extra hours after school or during the summer. So we try to address that way. When we have a student really in stress or in the behavioral specialist roams, and she can pull the student or students out of the classroom, let the teacher get on with her teaching and try and work with the student and settle them down. But it is an ongoing issue for us. And so it's an issue that, needs to be, I think I'm hearing it from everybody.
It's out there.
And I like that it's in working with a large population of our young ones. We have kids all the way from 3rd grade all the way through just entering college. It is something that we try as a small organization as well, smaller staff try to figure out, how can we best support our students, but our thinking is a lot of like, what's the prevention aspect, as Chris also mentioned, what can we do? What do we have control over? And jumping, I love what you're talking about, our young ones needing that opportunity to have responsibility, to be there in those primary roles. And that's how we operate. That's what makes us special, in the sense that we like to figure out ways to include our youth in the work. And so, we just finished for the summertime. Like I said, we hire our high schoolers as soon as freshman year, jumping into freshman year. We just hired one of the largest in a while, about 50 students. And so now it's trying to figure out how do we get all the funds to pay our kids, because we know how much this is important, our youth leading our youth and seeing that, and how it gets, we may not, we want to connect them with other organizations that do have those supports that can really tag on those kids that really need that. But then who are those kids that we see on the cusp that really need to find what they love, what they care about, have control over something, feel like they're responsible. And I think that's us as a nonprofit after school working with our kids is our focus. What can we do? How can we show them that we're here to support them, to be there for them, to be supportive? And I think that's the angle we are trying to always take, is how can we give the youth, opportunities that will hopefully be something that supports them in that mental growth and in those supports, while also partnering and connecting, as we're figuring out our organization and our capacity and what we're able to provide, but not trying to reinvent the wheel, but figure out ways to connect, but not, have to invent something, if there's things that we can do now, what can our staff do at this moment? So and I think that takes communication and talking and working with the city and working with to see what is happening, what is out there, and what can we do. So it's a tough one, I would say. It's really, and it's, as everyone's mentioned, it's something that's been very much more prevalent during this time with COVID. And so we're just figuring out ways to keep our kids engaged, excited, and loving something, so they can feel like they have something, essentially.
Chris, have you reached out to the community colleges, universities, educational institutions, getting, volunteers for students who are, training in the fields? Yeah.
Yes, what we're doing right now is trying to create that employment as a program like if you are going to be 14 or 15 working for us, you do have a couple of times a week, you meet with job coaches. You talk about the stresses of a new job, what it feels like. The colleges have been very receptive. And I was going to say to Nellie, at some point, we should definitely pull our nonprofit groups together. Mass Hire and the Youth Works program, I know I'm recorded, so whatever it says is, we got a lot of money in the government right now. It's flush. And we've got to find a way to maximize that because it's not going to last forever. And I do think that youth employment, there is funding. And I think if we can amass, a bigger pitch and a better case for support, I know there's new money coming out for that in the fall. So if you're employing youth, especially 14, 15, 16, let me know, because I would be happy to kind of lead a charge against how we can maximize that.
I was actually talking about the mental health workers.
Oh, we have not yet gone there. We don't want to be a mental health institution. We want to do what we did with Cornerstone. We want to support the environment for training, prevention, and partner with people who would come in. So what we're hoping to do is that those coping classes, they can't be like just drop-in group therapy. They could be very specific. And we believe that we've gotten connections with grad students that could lead those for compensation. But we do not have anyone, unfortunately, right now, that field is like technology was 20 years ago. It's going to be really hard to find LSWs, MSWs. It's going to be critically hard to find them. So we have to consolidate. If we're going to have one here, it could reach out to LEAP, reach out to Root. We got to put a team together that's mobile.
Yeah.
There's, we have time for one more question, but I'll also just recap by saying ECCF is partnering. We're in the midst of a behavioral health systems approach grant making that's looking at a lot of this issues, is regional navigators to connect all the resources, to look at the whole ecosystem across the region by buckets, where the resources are, where the beds are, where the services are, how to connect those, and then look at these other pipeline pathways from the workforce perspective. And that's not even tending to the language and cultural relevancy piece, which is also a big piece of it. So as a funding community, I think there's a ton of opportunity to look at that whole ecosystem, break it down by region to interconnect those connections to Chris's point, so that those flags can be identified in the field, addressed, and then everyone knows where the resources exists. And it also helps us to identify the gaps from a workforce perspective and how we reduce barriers. Because I think, Chris, when you and I spoke, you talked about not only the pipeline workforce but doing the mental health first aid to more, so that we're looking across all of us so that we can serve our community together. So love to continue to talk about that. We have time for one more question. Other questions? And then telehealth too. Linda, thank you for pointing that out. Telehealth is another big piece of the big piece of the solution. Hence the digital equity work, right? Access to care. I had one final question too, to not in disservice or to undermine the mental health crisis of all of our youth that all of your organizations are serving. How are you guys thinking about supporting your staff in terms of burnout in that front? Sorry, I didn't mean to drop a big lob.
No, it's everything. It's everything right now. If we're not focused on our staffs, we won't survive. Candidly, it's where the relief funding has been the most helpful. We try to take, whenever it comes in, we're trying to put it on the street. We're trying to talk to our staff about what they need, but they're getting killed. And somebody mentioned it earlier, it's the call outs. People are calling out at a rate I've never seen, and we're just constantly playing catch up. And so we are trying to use that mental health relief funds first into our staff, especially the caregivers, the childcare, the folks in that area, and the younger staff. There's no easy solution there. It's just diligence daily.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go, Nellie. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it's something that that I've talked really closely with Mark, our executive director, in terms of we're a small staff in terms of our in-house staff, but you know, it's communication. It's figuring out what's going on with everybody, where they're at, and I think being flexible and working with our staff. You know, I was out the past, week and a half. I'm just returning back from COVID, and having my body who's been doing the recruitment and working through summer, it's hard to figure out, how you juggle those different pieces, right? And same thing happened a month ago with our van driver. We only have 2 van drivers. And so it's flexibility, it's communication, it's being open, it's gauging where everyone's at and what they need, and figuring out where we can support one another. And I think that's what's worked well, at least for us there at YDO with our staff, is once that we figure out what else we can do. But there's no easy solution. And that's why I say, I think communication, talking, seeing what everyone's needs are, what they need, flexibility. If someone needs to work from home for part of the time to do something, right? Or if they're caring for their young ones. I know I get to bring my son to work half the day because I need to do that during this time, and work, and the staff have been welcoming to that. So it's, I don't know. It's not an easy solution, but it's being open and figuring out what can we do, and then how do we best support them, fund wise and what they need and all those different pieces. And so, not a straight answer, but just communication, I think is what rings a bell in my head as number one for me, is talking and figuring out what they need, and being open and hearing, and figuring out how we can adapt and work with that. And, as we're going through this.
Thank you.
So just ditto to everything Chris and Nellie said. The only thing I would add to that is those of us who are providing after school and summer programs, we have no respite. We have no summers off. You literally roll right from school year right into the summer and back right into school year. And it's exhausting for our staff. So we're giving everybody, we did it last year, we're going to do it again this year. We may do it forever, is we're giving everybody a week of rest at the end of August. It's an additional week of vacation. No emails, no work. You just take it off and chill. We're moving all our programs to start later in the fall, so that they're not coming back from that week of rest to have to open a program on September 5th. And trying to shut them down earlier. A lot of our grants, some of our grants have program hour requirements, so we have to work around that. But it's a tough one. But it's and so.
I'll just piggyback on that for just 1 second, because Linda, I think you nailed it. Is we do roll constantly from one to the other. I would say the biggest thing we've had to do, and I'm happy that we did it, is it's a culture shift. We, for the first time, and I think everyone is starting to say, it is not worth the risk of the quality and the integrity to over enroll what you can't support. And so, be it a snow day where we would normally run the program, we took the snow day. Normally, if we could squeeze in an extra week of camp, we squeezed it in, but now we don't. We're trying to give those breaks where in the past they weren't as needed, but they're needed right now. So we have to give up some service to survive with our caregivers and our staff.
Thank you. Well, thank you. As I think maybe it was Anna said, a huge thank you to all of you for the session. It certainly is overwhelming, and just a big thank you to you for sticking with it. As there's a sort of misconception with youth services that there's like a down period and the work never ends. It's been really incredible to watch the many ways that you have all pivoted, being under-resourced, and it demonstrates again the commitment to youth. And Thank you for sharing the information. It's really good feedback, I think, and information for funders of all different sizes and shapes to hear the ways that they can directly bring their different currencies to the table, either through volunteer opportunities, hearing about the behavioral health crisis that's very front and center for all of us, being flexible with dollars to ensure that there's trust in each of your work, that you can utilize them to the best use. So just a huge thank you again for all of your excellent work. And Megan and I will send a recap, the 5 things that we learned from this session. I'll also be sharing out reminders for some last final events that are happening for ECCF. The next big event that we have is our Funder Summit, which is for fund holders and institutional funders. And the topic is public health. So mental health will certainly be a big piece of that. And that is coming up later this month. So please join. It'll be a really interesting conversation. We're really exploring the role of philanthropy in these public health arenas, in the ways that we should or shouldn't be activating philanthropy for the greatest good. So thank you all for joining. A huge thank you to our speakers, and stay tuned for the 5 things that we learned and for all of our upcoming events. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.